Yo, what's up, everyone? My name is Jet. Welcome back to the episode of Inside the Lines. Hope you're having a wonderful Friday morning or Friday day. We have an early episode for y'all that are just tuning in, and we have a very interesting topic to discuss revolving around Denny Hamlin. Now, we touched on this in yesterday's episode, but very brief. It wasn't very much to go off of. Now we have a lot to break down. Denny Hamlin, being the open guy that he is, discuss what takes place or what took place during the appeals process with him and NASCAR regarding his incident with Ross Chastain in Phoenix back in March. He did this on his podcast, Actions Detrimental, and really opened up a whole nother can of worms about this appeals process now. Now, I wrote down some notes to really go over everything that happened in this podcast. Obviously, if you want to listen to the whole podcast yourself, you can do so. Leave a link in the description down below. It's real short, 32 minutes, not that long. But even though it's not a long episode, it has a lot of content. So what happens in an appeals process? Denny explains that. Basically, it's just kind of like what you see in a normal court system where both sides present their case, evidence, witnesses, things like that. First, NASCAR gives their side as to why they think Denny's guilty. Denny then and his team gives his side as to why he explains they're innocent. Denny goes real in depth with it. Like, he goes real in depth with explaining, detail by detail from start to finish what exactly happened and why what he did does not fit within the crimes that he's being charged for. I shouldn't say crimes, it's not crimes, but the actions that he's being charged for. He says that he didn't wreck nor spin Chastain, but it was contact that was avoidable for Ross Chastain. It was kind of an incident similar to Pocono last year where Hamlin pushed Chastain out wide. He pushed him and saying he was not going to cut him a break. And the only thing that was going to end is if Ross backs off or he hits the wall. Kind of the same situation that Denny was alluding to here, that he put him in a position that he either gets on the brakes or he keeps on it and they both go in the wall. That's kind of the scene that Denny was describing. Now, Hamlin was being charged with three things. Number one, manipulating race or championship. Number two, crashing or spinning a vehicle. Intent does not matter. That's an updated part of the rule book. And you're going to love this one. Actions detrimental to the sport. So that meaning, like, can't say out loud that, yes, I did wreck him on purpose. Like what he did on his podcast, basically got outright and admitted that, yeah, I wrecked Chastain on purpose or something to that effect. You can't, those were the things that NASCAR was charging him with. Now, what's interesting about those three things is that Denny Hamlin really does, he explained it in his podcast, a really good job of explaining why those three things doesn't make sense. Concerning number one, the manipulating a race or championship. He uses evidence from previous races, not even things from the 90s or 2000s, things that were really recently, like 2 years ago. He gave out an example, Chase Elliott at Bristol, where Chase did say, alluding to the effect that he was going to help the 5 car to prevent Kevin Harvick from winning. That is a form of race manipulation. Or if you want to look at the case of crashing a driver or, intent doesn't matter, and actions detrimental to the sport, outright saying that you're going to wreck the guy or you did wreck him on purpose. He also brings up Larson at the Clash in 22 where he wrecked Haley on purpose and outright admitted it. Or Logano in 2013 at Fontana, the crash that sent Denny Hamlin to a hospital with back pain. Logano basically said, listen, you race me this way, I'm going to race you that way. Again, kind of alluding to the fact that, hey, other drivers have said this, have done this in the past, and have had no penalties, no repercussions, but Denny did. And it also explains that being a part of this panel of seeing how it went down, that he's worried about the future of the sport on where the line is, what counts as self-policing and what counts as an action that warrants a penalty, because in Denny's eyes, that line is getting blurrier and blurrier.
Mine was none of these. None of them. It shouldn't even be on the page with the last 35 retaliatory incidents. That's what scares me about this. And I believe that, and I explained, the most detrimental thing we can do is tell drivers, you can't be yourselves. I heard Mike Davis talking about this on Dirty Mo Live right after, but it's so true. William Byron, who is represented by the same person, told Rod, I ain't doing no podcast now. I'm afraid of getting in a bad position and saying the wrong thing. And now you don't even have to say, I crashed Ross. You can just and you can just vaguely say it, and they can interpret it however they want. And that's what's scary, right? Is we have a star power problem in our sport. And I'm not sitting here saying I'm trying to be a star, but I'm trying to be honest and transparent. I'm trying to do what others are not doing, and that's being themselves, because a lot of these guys are awesome dudes. But NASCAR using me as an example will inhibit them or prevent them from wanting to come out of their shell.
And another part that was interesting about listening to Denny talk about the appeals process was that the panel was calling out NASCAR. They were questioning NASCAR, like saying things like, how is this incident, how is Denny's incident different from the other incidents in the past? They were even, calling out their contradictions and things like that. Very interesting.
But this concerns me because the results don't make any sense. And when the panel is consistently calling out NASCAR for them crossing words and saying, you're contradicting yourself, I don't get it. NASCAR themselves is saying, yeah, this is probably a subjective call. It's not egregious. We agree. Then why are we in the room? You want me to self-police? Tell me how to do it then. I tried breakfast. That didn't work. It's just disappointing.
He also goes on to give an example, like how does with Hendrick Motorsports, remember with the whole hood lovers, however you pronounce it. Denny also goes on to make a comparison with his situation and what happened with Hendrick Motorsports in the hood louvers, not lovers, louvers. I know someone pointed out in the comments. How is that different? Because, with what Hendrick did, they got an L2 penalty, modifying a part, basically cheated. And yet their total of 400 points, 100 points for each car, got rescinded. Yet an incident like this that we see happen, multiple times a year. I mean, we've seen this happen almost every year where a driver takes matters into his own hands. Denny didn't wreck him. He didn't take him out, just kind of put him in a situation where we're either both going to the wall or you back out. He gets a point penalty. Yet for Hendrick to cheat and have all of their points rescinded, how does that make sense? So that is what Denny's trying to allude here, is that the appeals panel is very fair. Each get, really unlimited time to present their case. The appeals panel then comes to a conclusion. The issue that people have is that when they do come to a conclusion, they don't explain it.
Can't wait. I'm sitting down and I'm smiling, and I kind of look at them, and they're not as excited as they were like 20 minutes ago. And I'm just like, all right, okay. And literally they read off the verdict in about 15 seconds, and it was so quick. And they're like, that's it. And everyone starts standing up, and I'm looking at Eric, and I'm like, wait a minute, what'd they say? Like, what did they say? He's like, they're keeping it as is. I says, okay, why? No reason. It just, that's where, when the media talks about, well, why? Why is the difference in the Hendrick and the Kaulig? Well, nobody knows because we don't have an explanation.
Now, keep in mind, this situation is completely different from the Kaulig Racing situation or the Hendrick situation. With those, these are L2 penalties, and now Hendrick has an L1 penalty. We'll see how that goes if NASCAR or if Hendrick wants to appeal that. This is a on-track incident. This is driver's code, driver's ethics, quote unquote, boys have had it type of situation. Based on the way that, the appeals panel were, as Denny mentioned, calling out NASCAR, say, hey, you're contradicting, calling out some of the things that they're saying. And yet NASCAR still won the case. Denny still lost completely. He does bring up a fair point that, something that we all want to know is the reason as to why. It's like, okay, you come to a conclusion, but why did you come to this conclusion? To really put it to bed, to really so that the fans and other drivers can go, oh, okay, I get it. You know what to do and what not to do. But for, as Denny described it, for the appeals panel to just say, NASCAR wins, we're done here, not offer any explanation, any reasoning to come to that conclusion, is kind of concerning, especially when you consider the fact that Denny makes some really good points that what Denny did, in my opinion, wasn't that bad. Now, I talked about this in my Phoenix race review, that it was interesting that he hit Chastain, but even if he did on purpose, it wasn't egregious. It wasn't like, honestly, I would compare it maybe similar to what we saw happen with Elliott at Bristol in 21. Obviously not to the same level, but you know, it was a driver that took matters into his own hands. It wasn't so severe. Like Hamlin didn't wreck Chastain. He didn't spin him. You know, it was contact to the point where Denny said that it was so minimal that you couldn't even see it as crash damage. So it was a very interesting 32 minutes and a quite concerning 32 minutes because, again, this does call out what I and what many others have been curious about with this appeals panel, is that they don't give explanations as to why they come to the conclusions that they come to. You know, it's like, yeah, you say, again, okay, with Hendrick, why did they get their points back? We don't know why. I mean, it's an L2 penalty. You know, it's if you find them and keep the crew chief suspended, you admit that they were in the wrong. But then why'd you get back the points? Colleague, why was that upheld? You know, this explanation, again, this is the main issue with this appeals panel, is that they are not transparent. We can put the word consistency to the side because we don't know exactly what happens in these meetings between Hendrick and Colleague, for example. We don't know exactly what happens in these meetings, but they're not transparent. They don't give an explanation. They don't give a reasoning for it, and that is very concerning. And speaking of the appeals panel, there's another update to things like this. So NASCAR, as a result of the Hendrick penalty, NASCAR decided to make a change. Originally in the past, like what we saw with Hendrick Motorsports, you could reduce a penalty however you may feel, however you feel so fit. Well, now you can't really do that anymore, at least not to the extent that the appeals panel had previously. NASCAR has updated the rulebook stating that if an appeals panel board chooses to overturn a penalty, it has to be within the range, you know, of what an L1, L2, or L3 penalty is, or something to that effect. Meaning they're trying to enforce the appeals panel to go for a more either keep the penalty or get rid of the entire penalty, but nothing in between. It says here on the rulebook, if a penalty is modified, it may be increased or decreased within the minimum and maximum penalty ranges prescribed for the violation level as outlined in section 10.5.2, determination of penalties. Level 1, 20 to 75 points, 1 to 10 playoff points, 1 to 3 races for a roster member, 1 position from a roster, and a fine between $25,000 to $100,000. Level 2, 75 to 120, 10 to 25 playoff points, 4 to 6 races for the member suspension, 1 to 2 positions suspended, fine of $100K to $250K, and then finally level 3, 120 to 180, 25 to 50 playoff points, no playoff eligibility for driver and or team owner, 6 members suspended, and 1 to 2 positions also suspended, 1 vehicle suspension, fine between $250 and $500,000. So again, just to reiterate, if an appeals panel chooses to overturn that, it has to overturn in that range. So if it's an L2 penalty, okay, fine, you can overturn that, but it has to be within these lines. So perfect example with Hendrick Motorsports, we're going to use that reference a lot. They had a 100-point penalty. If that were to be overturned, it had to be overturned between 75 and 120 driver points and owner points, 10 to 15 playoff points, and a fine between $100,000 and $250,000. So no longer can they just automatically drop one of them. You either stick within these lines, keep it, or drop all of it. But you can't do what the appeals panel did with Hendrick and the Hood Louvers. So my thoughts on this. I know a lot of people called out NASCAR for saying they're being petty about this. That they were angry that Hendrick, you know, basically kind of got away with it. I mean, they got the points back. They still had to pay a fine, but they got the most important thing. That's the points back. That they were being just petty. They were being butthurt about it. I can agree with that, but at the same time, NASCAR has to do something. I mean, they implemented this to ensure that because the teams wanted, you know, to be able to save money. Okay, well, to do that, we have to make sure that the penalties are severe so that it forces you to stay in that box. Well, if Hendrick can do what they did, basically cheat and not necessarily get away with it, but they still got to keep their points back. That's going to mess up the business model for the future. So NASCAR had to do something. Like, I don't understand why people are complaining so much. Like, they had to do something. Maybe it's because it is Hendrick. Maybe if it was a team that wasn't favored, the reaction would be more positive. But I'm glad NASCAR did this. I think this was a good decision. You can rescind points within a certain range, keep it, or get rid of all of it. But you can't get rid of all of just one portion, but keep everything else. That's just stupid. So I'm glad NASCAR did this. Now, it is interesting the timing of it, that they did it right after the Hendrick appeal. So it does seem that NASCAR is being petty about it. I can definitely understand that mindset, but at the same time, I don't blame NASCAR for doing what they did. I think this was a right decision. It would have been maybe a better reaction to do it at the beginning of the season during the offseason instead of right after the Hendrick penalty, but you know, it is what it is. I think this was the right call by NASCAR. And finally, to cap off this episode, some good news to end off this episode. The NASCAR All-Star Race in North Wilkesboro, one of the most hyped up events of the entire year. We now got a format, and for the first time in years, it's a format that I love. It's simple, fun, easy to understand. Let's go over it. So we start off Friday, May 19th, practice for both trucks and the Cup Series. And then later that night, it'll be qualifying, but through a pit crew challenge. How would that work? This is how it's going to work. So qualifying will be based on pit stop time only. 4-tire pit stop, no fuel. The results determine starting lineups for the All-Star Heat races and the All-Star Open. So I love this because one thing I've always loved with the All-Star Race weekend is that it's an opportunity to see the pit crew guys, the ones that go over the wall, the underrated athletes, or the unspoken athletes, I guess you could say, the ones that don't get the amount of spotlight as the drivers do. This is their chance to finally shine, to really make a difference. So I love this idea. Then Saturday will be the heat races. Now the heat races are 60 laps each. Results from heat race number 1 sets the all-star race inside row, while results from heat race number 2 sets up the outside row. Now the all-star open that will take place early Sunday afternoon is going to be 100 laps with a competition break at around lap 40. The top 2 finishers transfer to the all-star race, and then a fan vote transfers to the all-star race as well. Now, obviously, how you come up with that conclusion with the All-Star Race field, as I mentioned, the drivers' names, you had to have won a race either in 2022 or in 2023, be a past All-Star Race winner and or former Cup champion, or be one of the 2 All-Star Open finishers, top 2 All-Star Open finishers, and or win the fan vote. So these are the drivers that are currently locked into the All-Star Race. 21 drivers are going to be locked into this one, or 22, but there's an asterisk around Chase Elliott depending on when he can come back. But there are 21 confirmed with a possible 22 confirmed entries, that being Christopher Bell, Ryan Blaney, Alex Bowman, Chase Briscoe, Chris Buescher, Kyle Busch, William Byron, Ross Chastain, Austin Cindric, Austin Dillon, Chase Elliott, Denny Hamlin, Kevin Harvick, Eric Jones, Brad Keselowski, Kyle Larson, Joey Logano, Tyler Reddick, Daniel Suarez, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Martin Truex Jr., and Bubba Wallace. So those are the drivers that are confirmed into the All-Star Race. So now the All-Star Race format, 200 laps, all laps count. Start on sticker tires, 3 additional sets in the pit box. Overtime rules in effect. There will be a competition break on or around lap 100. After the competition break, only 1 additional set of sticker tires may be used. Now, I love this because this encourages long green flag runs, because one thing that a lot of fans that were at the cars, the late model tour races at North Wilkesboro, as well as other drivers saying that this track is like gold when the tires are eaten up, when it's a long green flag run. So I love that this format kind of encourages that the drivers stay on the worn tires as long as possible. So I love the format. I love the fact that the pit crew gets a chance to really shine. There's nothing else to complain at. I am so excited for North Wilkesboro. But that's going to be it for this episode of Inside Lines. What are your thoughts on the Hamlin appeal board panel? Again, I highly recommend. I didn't go over everything because I want you guys to really listen to this podcast. It's very informative. Opened my eyes to a lot about how the appeals panel board actually works. But after listening to it, definitely think Denny Hamlin should have had his penalties, all of his penalties, been rescinded. He should have not have to pay the fine nor have a penalty deduction. I feel like he should have been found innocent. But Yeah, it's real interesting to say the least. And then obviously, of course, the appeals panel decision by NASCAR. What are your thoughts on that? The new rule that they added. Do you like it? Do you not? And of course, your thoughts on the new All-Star race format. Again, everything, comment section down below. Looking forward to hear your thoughts on this one. And until next time, my name is Jet from MDK. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more content. And I'll see y'all next time.